Hello, this is Jason Beckerdite, and I wanted to talk to you today a little bit about our service to God. And I want to talk about our qualifications for service. Have you ever felt like you're not qualified to serve God? Has that prevented you from serving Him? If it has, I sure hope it hasn't. Because if you look at the people in the Bible, none of them were qualified either. And we shouldn't feel like we need to be qualified to serve God on His behalf. So let's look at some examples in the Bible. So Moses thought he was qualified to serve God. He thought he was so qualified and the people were ready to follow him, he ended up killing an Egyptian. He then spends the next 40 years with God finishing his preparation by serving as a shepherd and being thoroughly humbled, so that by the time God does approach him in Exodus, Moses is in a very different place. And if we go to Exodus 3 verse 11, it says, as Moses is being talked to by God at the burning bush, Moses says, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and that I should bring the children of Israel out of Egypt?" And with that doubt in his mind, do you think God told him how qualified he was? No, this is God's answer. God says, "I will certainly be with you, and this shall be a sign to you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain." You'll notice Moses' qualification had nothing to do with himself. It had everything to do with God. God is our qualification to serve him, and it's not about us. You can look at so many other examples in the Bible of God being our qualification for service. Isaiah was the same way. As God calls him to serve, Isaiah is in heaven and he sees God, and his response is, "Woe is me." He knows he is thoroughly unqualified for service. But then when God calls and says, "Who will serve me?" Isaiah says, "Send me." And that's all God wants. God only wants us to say, "Send me," not that we have to be qualified in some way. And you can look at so many other examples in the Bible. Gideon was a coward, and yet he is one of God's greatest generals. David was not a warrior. He was the youngest son, which meant he wasn't important, and he was a shepherd. And yet he leads Israel and is a great warrior. Jonah is sent by God to be his messenger and runs away, and yet God still uses him. Matthew was a traitor to the Israelite cause, yet Jesus calls him to be one of his apostles. Peter, supposed to be the leader of the apostles, he's the denier of Jesus, thoroughly unqualified for service. And then Paul, who is supposed to be the great missionary for Jesus, he also persecuted Jesus. We can all find reasons that these people were not qualified for service, and yet all of them were called by God to serve. And when you look at what Paul said was his qualification, it had nothing to do with him once again. In Philippians 4:13, Paul says, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." It's not what Paul does, it's about what God does. God is our qualification for service. So if you ever feel like you're being called to service, don't think it has anything to do with you. It's all about God, and He is going to do what He needs through you. You only need to be willing, like Isaiah, to say, "Send me." That's your qualification. So do you feel qualified for service? Your answer should probably be no, because you're not qualified. None of us are qualified. But I ask you to say, "Send me." Let's serve God together.